This morning I'm going to do something a little different. My lesson is not my lesson. It was composed by a brother who was the minister where I grew up in Lovington, New Mexico, probably in the early 80s. But it fits very well with what we've been talking about on Sunday mornings when I'm speaking about discipleship and what the Lord wants from us as far as being disciples. And so I'm going to basically give you what he has to say, particularly about the name Christian. Is Christian our name? The man's name was Cecil Hook. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce him. He's dead and gone now. He's, I should say, I guess for a believer, he's living in another place. Okay. This is what he has to say about the name Christian. A person may be known by character or by name or both. Jesus wants us to be recognized by character, with love being the primary trait of that character. Since he did not give us a name as a mark of identity, we should not seek this easy route to identification or recognition. It is much more convenient to tell people that we are Christians, to wear a button or display a bumper sticker kind of statement proclaiming discipleship, than it is to be known by our fruits as disciples. The disciples were given no proper name to wear either individually or collectively in the scripture. And he says, my reaching the conclusion that Jesus gave us no name to wear has ruined some of my once favored lessons concerning our new name, which the mouth of Jehovah shall name. He makes a reference to Isaiah 62, verse 1 through 5, in chapter 56, verse 5. I interpreted these passages to be prophecies of the name Christian, but to support such a contention, they must be taken from their context. The fact is that the very text tells us that the new name would be Hephzibah, which means my delight is in her. The latter reference promises their names or heritage would not be cut off. The Isaiah 62 and Isaiah 56 passages he's talking about there. The very fact that Christian is used only 3 times in the scriptures should be enough to arouse some suspicion or skepticism about it being a new God-given proper name for God's people. Also, it was about 10 years after the beginning of the church before anyone was ever called a Christian. Furthermore, there is no record of any disciple calling another believer a Christian or of applying that designation to himself. Luke writes that the disciples were called Christians, not the disciples called themselves Christians. Okay? The first appearance of the word Christian is in Acts chapter 11, verse 25 and 6, where Luke informs us, so Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the church and taught a large company of people, and in Antioch the disciples were for the first time called Christians. In Antioch they were disciples who were called Christians. Disciples is what they were. Christians is what somebody began to call them. From this point in the historical record, Luke did not begin to refer to them as Christians. but he continued to refer to them as disciples. Matthew uses disciples 72 times, Mark 44 times, Luke in his gospel 38 times, John 77 times, and Luke in Acts 30 more times. However, in the remaining 22 portions of the New Testament, the word is not used at all, which would indicate that disciple was no proper name either. It's just descriptive of the people, okay? The self-designations used by the inspired writers were believers, or those who believe, etc. Brothers, mentioned 132 times, saints mentioned 50 times, the church is used 85 times, and other such designations as elect or servants, and those that call upon the name of the Lord. There is no indication, however, that any of these self-designations were to be considered as a proper name for Jesus' followers. From the writings of those times, it is seen that the adjective ending, IAONS, denoted the adherence of an individual or party. So adherents to the Christ were called Christianos, or Christians. It is a Roman ending, which would not likely originate among the Jews, especially in Judea. It is evident that the name did not originate with the disciples themselves, but it was applied by those outside their community, either in derision or as some sort of nickname, a common folk designation. Certainly the unbelieving Jews would not use the name of their Messiah to apply to those whom they considered as adherents to a false Messiah. So we had to wait about 10 years for the church to spread among the pagan Gentiles for such a popular designation to come into use. Among the unbelieving Jews, disciples were scorned as the sect of the Nazarenes in Acts 24, verse 5 says. No doubt the pagans of Antioch were familiar with the Jewish religion related to the synagogue. Now a new religion had separated itself from the synagogue, proclaiming salvation through one Jesus the Christ. So people began to distinguish them from the Jews as adherents of Christ, or Christianos, Christians. Groups may protest a designation given by the outsiders, but later accepted, as was the case with the Lutherans, with the Protestants, and with Mormons. Secular history reveals that the disciples later gave universal acceptance to the name, since it does honor Christ. Like the cross of shame, which became a venerated symbol of God's love. This name rose from its unlikely beginnings to the highest place of honor. Let us consider the three mentions of Christian in the Scriptures. In Acts 11:26, as we've noted already, the first use of the designation evidently was by the pagan populace of Antioch in Syria, rather than by the disciples themselves. In his second mention, we hear the time-honored exclamation of King Agrippa in the King James Version language. Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian, he says in Acts 26, verse 28. This has been interpreted by the common people as a sincere admission by Agrippa. But if he were so sincere, why did he break off Paul's discourse? Being king, he could have demanded a command performance, the continuation of Paul's speech. Evidently, he was making no admission of being almost converted. He was, instead of being convicted, he was, as a king, he we see a man who is being put on the spot by a religious zealot. His dignity is being insulted. So he scoffs at Paul. In a short time you think to make me a Christian? That's how the RSV renders it. In other words, Agrippa was saying, Paul, you think that in one short presentation, of your fanatical claims, you can make a Christian out of me. And the inflection of his voice as he sneered the word Christian must have been insulting. Notice too that Paul avoided using the name as applying to himself in his reply to Agrippa. He didn't say, I'm a Christian, I wish you were a Christian. He didn't use the name at all, did he? For the third use of Christian, we look to 1 Peter 4, verse 16. But the entire chapter serves as its context. The believers are suffering fiery ordeals of persecution for Christ. They're being accused of various wrongdoings, and listed among them was that of being a Christian. To encourage these persecuted saints, Peter writes, but let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or a wrongdoer, or as a mischief maker. Yet if one suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed. Or under that name, let him glorify God. Being called Christian in a derogatory manner was a part of the reproach heaped upon them. Peter urged that they glorify God under the name of reproach which they had not chosen. Righteous persons have always received taunting and derisive appellations from those who oppose them. Their worth is proved by their being unashamed to wear the disparaging names. In spite of all this, which I have brought to your attention, I do not object to being called a Christian, for I am an adherent of Christ. I just refuse to accept it as a proper name given to us to wear to distinguish us in our religion. Now I come to a more important point of this treatise. The name Christian has become a mental and an emotional block to prevent our acceptance of others who follow Christ. We define who is a Christian and how to become a Christian, but the scriptures do not accommodate our definitions. In telling how to become a Christian, we use the examples of the conversion of those on Pentecost, the Samaritans, the Ethiopian treasurer, Cornelius, and Saul. Their acceptance of Jesus made them believers and disciples, but not Christians, for no one had ever been called a Christian at the time of their conversion. After defining a Christian as one who hears, believes, repents, confesses faith, and is baptized, we have consistently refused any acceptance of or fellowship with any who have not measured up to our scruples about those actions of obedience. We have drawn a convenient line there that excludes most of the Christian world as being unbelievers and non-Christian. However, when we think of a person as a believer or disciple, that convenient sectarian line disappears. While a believer or disciple will obey the 5 steps as he learns and is convinced of the need, he will also continue to learn and obey all of the scriptural directives for his discipleship. As long as he lives, he will never cross the line into the ultimate. At what point can we say that he became a believer or disciple whom we may accept? Is it not when his faith is initiated, causing him to take his first feeble steps to follow? He is then a believer and follower, and hopefully he will continue to grow and advance in his relationship with Christ. I can accept him as a believer or disciple, even though I might consider him to be at a less advanced stage than I enjoy. We can grow together. I am not to become his judge. especially to judge him by the artificial standard that I have made by defining when a person becomes a Christian. He is a believer and a disciple, a learner, a follower, an adherent at every point on the road of his spiritual progress. The concept that I am rejecting is that he becomes a Christian whom I can accept only at one point in his spiritual journey, and that thereafter he is a Christian, whether he progresses as a learner or a follower or not. Jesus told us to make disciples, not Christians. And there may be no difference, but we have made one to accommodate our sectarian distinctions. That's his thoughts. As I think about this congregation, there have been quite a few of you who recently, say in the last couple of years, have become followers of Jesus. Y'all can call yourselves Christians, as Brother Hook made a point in his lesson, because you are adherents to Christ. But I want you to remember that what Jesus told us to do was to go and make disciples, or make disciples as we go, depending on which scripture you read. So what he wants is disciples or followers, not a fan club who only wear the proper name Christian. Many of us here have been believers for quite some time. And it's not out of place for me to remind all of us in that category of what we came to by coming to Jesus. He didn't call us to wear a new hat with his name on it. He wants folks to wear his character so other people can see who he is. These words from Matthew 7, verse 21 to 23 from the Good Speed Translation. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will get into the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, was it not in your name that we prophesied, and by your name that we drove out demons, and by your name we did many mighty acts? Then I will say to them plainly, I never knew you. Go away from me, you who do wrong. I don't want any of you here today to hear those words from the Lord. Listen and really hear what Jesus says and do it. And Jesus' words, the way he would say it, build on the rock. Doing the things he taught in his Sermon on the Mount will change who you are from deep within yourself. And you will be like him.